Well, good morning, brothers and sisters. I would like to invite you to join me as we begin in a word of prayer as we turn this session over to the Lord. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Lord Jesus, who entered this life as an unborn child, and after you took human flesh and before you were born, the government tried to eliminate you by indiscriminately killing unborn children. Our nation today is also indiscriminately killing unborn children, but really trying to eliminate you, your word, your life from this nation. And so today I ask your blessing on us as we gather here. We say to you, in contrast to our culture, we say, "Come, Lord Jesus, be with us. Bless us today as we meet. Give me clarity and good communication as I speak, and grant to these folk the ability to discern and understand even the things that I may not explain as clearly as I should. Come, Holy Spirit, be among us and prevail." We offer this time to you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, my brothers and sisters, I came here last year, and Molly had invited me to talk about clergy sex abuse and homosexual priests, which is an important topic, but I said to her or to someone, I'm not sure who, I'm not sure what that has to do directly with abortion, but I've done a lot of research on abortion and have a lot of things to say about that. So Molly graciously asked me back again this year to talk about that topic. And I want to talk to you today about the false promises that are put forth about abortion. Our first parents were deceived by subtle lies of the snake to commit sin, and their lives were, they thought it would be wonderful. The snake said, "You're going to become like God," which had a kernel of truth in it. And they reached out to become like God, and instead they were estranged from God and entered into death. Today, in many ways, young men and young women are enticed into sexual activity with the promise of fulfillment. They're searching for paradise. And they find out that it brings actually sadness and strain and struggle and death. And so I want to talk about some of those false promises, those subtle lies today. Today we have reached a new extreme about abortion and its effects on women. 30 years ago or more, abortion was recognized, or maybe they were just paying lip service, but the narrative was that an abortion, even if it should be legal, is something that is not desirable. We should try to have few of them, that it was not a positive thing for a woman. Today, all that is gone. Today, the research and policy elites like to call abortion health care. Think about that. In fact, they call it abortion care, as if it's curing something, as if there's a disease out there that somehow it's making better. Having an abortion is the moral equivalent of having a tooth pulled today. And so they tell us a series of lies. One lie is that having an abortion is safer than giving birth to a child. Have you heard that one? Yeah, it's all in the airways today, as if it's a great choice. It's a reasonable choice. They tell us that the reason women don't like to talk about their abortions, now, if you do research and fertility surveys, abortion is the most concealed behavior related to fertility in American life. Somewhere between 50 to 60% of abortions are never reported on the National Survey of Family Growth or on the other data sets that I've looked at here in this study, because women don't like to acknowledge them, don't like to admit them, usually. But today, they tell us that it's not because they feel conflicted or ashamed or regret that experience, but it's because they feel stigmatized by all those intolerant social conservatives. Abortion is supposed to be a positive experience today. So I want to rebut and push back at some of these claims. I mentioned a minute ago the claim that abortion is safer than childbirth, and I just want to mention this in passing as an example of some of the arguments that we need to make. It is true, here's the kernel of truth in that, a first trimester abortion is less medically risky from the procedure than a full-term delivery is. The death rate, the failure rate is smaller, we think. Now, the failure rate or the death rate from abortion is very questionable because a lot of the difficulties following abortions are not reported. We have no standardized means even of measuring abortions in this country, unlike almost any other medical procedure. But as far as we know, it could be safer. Now, it's only safer if you're talking about the clinical risk from the procedure. If you start talking about subsequent extended risk of breast cancer, let's say, or subsequent preterm births or of mental health disorders, then the risks of abortion go way up. But what's wrong with that claim? Well, what's wrong with the claim is that is that pregnancy, takes 270 days, actually 266 days, right, from start to finish. And you're comparing an event just a few weeks into pregnancy with another event that happens at the end of pregnancy. And anytime you compare the risks of two activities, the longer someone is subject to risk, the more the risks rise over time. When you get in your car, if you drive 3 blocks, you're at much less risk of dying or getting in an accident than if you drive 500 miles, right? Because the risks accrue for each mile that you drive, and so for each day and week of pregnancy, the risks accrue. So to compare those two events is like comparing the risk of driving 3 blocks with the risks of driving the 500 miles and saying, well, it's much safer to stop driving after 3 blocks. Well, yeah, it is, but you're not comparing two comparable things. In fact, anything that happens in pregnancy at 9 months is going to be more risky than an abortion at under 12 weeks. An abortion at 9 months is way more risky than an abortion at 12 weeks. And so the proper comparison is between the two events that happen at the same time. And at any point in pregnancy, continuing the pregnancy is much safer than having an abortion at any point in pregnancy. And the risk with abortion rise so fast that by the 4th month or the middle of the 4th month, the risk of having an abortion is far higher than even a full-term delivery. And so that's a specious, false, misleading piece of information, but it's put out there as if somehow it's rational. I'm still working on pushing back on this one, by the way. So I don't have the charts to chart out these risks, but it's very clear if you look at it. Now, some of you are out there saying, well, why even talk about these things at all? Some people said this to me yesterday, and I understand that it's a concern and a debate that we have. Why should we give consequential arguments against abortion when what's really important is the moral violation? We should push to uphold the sanctity of human life of the unborn child, and that should be the reason that we oppose abortions. So why even talk about difficulties for women following abortion as I do, or any other consequential things? But the reason we do that is because we want to make a case not to those who already agree that abortion is wrong, but we want to make a case to those who don't agree. Those who have rejected the moral claim for abortion, but are still open to hearing some of the rational claims, the ways that abortion may harm women. It's always the case that to argue for your position on the basis of your principles is much weaker, much less convincing to someone else than to argue for your conclusion on the basis of their own principles. And so Christians from the very beginning, beginning with St. Paul on Mars Hill in Athens, have presented arguments for the Christian faith on the basis of pagan Stoic principles in the culture around them. And so this is part of that process, I believe, of apologetics, of convincing those who won't believe necessarily that abortion is morally wrong, but do believe that somehow it's beneficial for women, and that's why it should happen, to say, no, it's not beneficial for women. In every abortion, there are two victims, and you may not be concerned about the unborn victim, but you may be concerned about the woman who is also victimized in that abortion. It's also important today to do that because we have generally in our culture a polarization where people talk to people who agree with them much more than to people who disagree with them. And so we have people who are not able to really communicate across the divide of very different presuppositions. And it's possible for us in the pro-life movement to show the way, to provide an example of loving our enemy, of reaching across the divide and arguing on the basis of rational, empirical principles why abortion should not be pursued. And so that's what I'm doing in this research. It's also important in the legal realm. Now, the major medical associations today will tell us that a woman's mental health problems are not increased by having an abortion. That's the main piece of misinformation that I want to talk about today. Here's the American Psychological Association, which says, quote, among adult women who have an unplanned pregnancy, the relative risk of mental health problems is no greater than if they have a single elective first trimester abortion than if they deliver that pregnancy. That's the claim today, and that's the basis upon which all of our cultural elites say abortion doesn't harm women. A similar statement from the British Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, also I could cite the National Science Foundation and a number of other agencies that word things in much the same way. And I want to tell you that these claims have a kernel of truth in them, but they're highly misleading. Do you know why? Look at this word. Now I have this here. Let me see if I can get this going. Look at this word unplanned, or this word unwanted. That qualifies this claim in a way that, in my research, my recent research I show, undermines it. Why? Because many abortions terminate wanted pregnancies. If we just look at unwanted pregnancies, we're not looking at all of the pregnancies. Wanted pregnancy abortions occur most often because there's not congruence between the two parents of the child on whether there should be an abortion. Either he wants an abortion and she doesn't, or she wants an abortion and he doesn't. And in that first case, when you ask the woman, did you want to have an abortion? She said, no, I didn't. But she had one anyway, usually because her partner or parents want her to have an abortion anyway. Now, different research puts the number of these abortions, or we could call them even coerced abortions, there's a certain amount of coercion at different rates. But what is unrecognized by the pro-abortion establishment, and particularly researchers, is that in almost every abortion there's an element of coercion. Women are mostly ambivalent at best about having an abortion, and so there's a push to do that. If you saw the clips or saw the movie Unplanned, they have a sequence in there where they show an intake procedure for an abortion, and it's that you can see the coercion where the so-called counselor is saying, well, you know, if you get your abortion today, I can give you a discount, and we're ready, and we want to get it out of the way, and it'll be safer, and all of these reasons. It sounds like you're in a used car lot, and they're saying, well, what do I need to do to put you in an abortion today? There's a certain kind of coercion that goes on to that. So I thought if these abortions, wanted pregnancy abortions which are ignored, are more distressing than the unwanted ones which are studied by these social science agencies, then they are systematically understating the dilemma or the distress for women from abortion. And so that's what prompted this particular study that I'm talking about today. The data that I used is some of the finest, most respected data in the world, the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health, commonly called AdHealth for short. And this is funded by the US government and about a coalition of about 15 government agencies and also some private foundations, begun in 1995. They took a sample of students from U.S. middle schools and high schools, kids in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, randomly sampled from schools across the country, both public and private schools. And so you have a great sample because in our country we have almost universal secondary education. And so they took this sample, they weighted it to conform to the population so it was even more representative. And they gave them a barrage of questions, thousands of questions about their lives. They also interviewed their parents and got the parental background. This was in 1995. They did it again 7 years later in 2002. At that time, the age of those young people was about age 22. It was age 15 at the first wave. And so then by the third wave that I look at, they did it again in 2008, and they were about age 28 on average. On both of those follow-ups, they managed to get over 80% of the original sample back. So they started out with over 20,000 persons in the sample, and they had a very good response and rate. So these data have been used in thousands of academic studies. Over 10,000 scholars have used them. They're the basis of over 2,000 academic studies. It's some of the most widely used and respected data in the world. From that sample, I gathered a sample of just under 4,000 women who had been pregnant by wave 4 in 2008. And for each pregnancy, the interviewer asked, how did this pregnancy end? So that was my measure of abortion and birth. And they also asked, did you want to have a child then? And so that was my measure of whether or not it was wanted or unwanted. Of those under 4,000 women, just over 1,000 of them reported having an abortion, which tells you that about 26% of American women by age 28 have had at least one abortion. Actually, most of them have had more than one abortion. About 55% who reported ever having an abortion also reported having more than one abortion. Of these 1,017 women, 807 had had only unwanted pregnancies aborted, but 210 reported having aborted one or more wanted pregnancies. So in these data, it's about 1 in 5 women who have had the experience of having to have an abortion of a child that otherwise they would have wanted to have. They also, in these data, ask a huge barrage of questions about psychological health. Using validated indicators, they measured depression, anxiety disorder, and suicide ideation. I gathered those 3 and added them up to get a measure of what I call affective disorders, or you might call them internalizing disorders. And then they also ask about drug abuse, opioid abuse, marijuana, and alcohol abuse. These are all substance abuse disorders recognized by the APA and other psychological agencies. And so I added those up and got a measure of substance abuse disorders, and then I added the affective and substance abuse and looked at total mental health disorders following abortion. Now, this is all background. In 2016, I had done a similar study in the same data, not looking at whether the abortion was wanted or unwanted, or the pregnancy was wanted or unwanted, but just to find out what the overall risk of distress for abortion was in the United States. This was the first time anyone had ever looked at long-term longitudinal data on difficulties following abortion in the United States. I say that sometimes and people say, really, no one else ever did this? And then I say, yeah, actually, no one did. We have a lot of not so great research on abortion. Most of it is misleading because it only follows women for a short period of time. A lot of studies will follow women for a year or 2 years. The max, it seems to be about 5 years. For those who want to put forth a picture that there's no harm for women following abortion, because when you start looking longer than 5 years, problems begin to increase and occur. Every study that has followed women more than 10 years following an abortion has found statistically significant psychological difficulties for those women. Now, I say every study. There's only about 5 or 6 of them. I've done 2 of them. There's also studies that have been done in New Zealand and in Sweden that follow the same methodology. Every one of them find difficulties. In this study that I did in 2016, I found this number right here I'm highlighting right now. The risk ratio for total mental health problems following an abortion was 1.45, which means that the risk was elevated 45%. Women by age 28 who had had an abortion were about half again more likely to have one or more of those 7 mental health disorders than women who had never had an abortion. And that was the purpose of that study, to look at and to find out if that was true. I also found out in that study a couple of other interesting facts. First, I was able to estimate the percentage of all of those mental health problems among women in the United States at age 28 that could be attributable to abortion. And I found that just under 9% of all of these 7 psychological disorders could be accounted for by abortion. It means if we did not have abortion in the United States, the rate of these disorders would be about 9% lower than it is now. Now, I did not follow up on the economic calculation, but you can easily go out and find out how much it costs in terms of human costs and economic costs to treat these disorders. You find out that's what abortion is costing us as a nation and is costing young women today. I also found that while the risk of disorder was increased with abortion, it was decreased by having birth, by having ever given birth. Now, that's another finding that's widely denied in the research on abortion and mental health. In fact, we have a series of studies that people have done to show how women struggle when they have to give birth to these unwanted children and try to show how difficult it is for them. But here in this kind of look at very objective, high-quality data, I didn't find, as most people expected, as I kind of half expected to find, that having children increased mental health struggles. It actually decreased them, right? I mean, having children can be stressful and can upend your life, as we all know, but it's something that benefits women. So I have all kinds of takeaways from the earlier study that in the interest of time I'm going to skip over and go right to the 2019 study. In that study that I've just finished last year, I found that abortions of unwanted pregnancies had a risk ratio of 1.18, whereas wanted pregnancies, the risk ratio was much higher, 1.69. This little 1 here means that it's not quite a significant difference for unwanted pregnancy abortions. So in a way, it's kind of true to say that women don't have higher difficulties with those abortions, but it's very significant and much higher with the wanted pregnancy abortions. I graphed them here. You can see that the risk of affective distress is 4 times higher if it's an abortion of a wanted pregnancy than if it's an abortion of an unwanted pregnancy. So by ignoring the wanted child abortions, our elites whitewash away the most troubling abortions for women and continue this false narrative that abortion overall is not disturbing for women. Now, my study was the very first one that's ever looked at the difficulties for women following abortions of wanted pregnancies. And why is that? The reason is that the idea that a woman could have an abortion where she wanted to have the child is just denied. It's denied almost by definition by persons who research and who study this. They just can't wrap their minds around it. I wish I could show you the responses I got from reviewers and editors. They said they're perplexed by this idea. They can't imagine that these women even exist, even though they have several hundred of them reporting this on a fertility survey. They don't believe that the women could have responded the way that they obviously did respond on this survey by definition. It's just kind of a blindness. I also looked at the risk of substance abuse. Very few people have ever looked at this. The risk of substance abuse is actually much higher than the risk of affective distress following abortion. But I just kind of mentioned that in passing. Now, the risk ratios that I've reported so far are odds-based risk ratios, and I don't want to get too technical here, but if you want to go out of here and say, well, a woman's risk of having these affective or substance abuse distress is increased by having an abortion, you should use this table, because here I've converted those odds-based risk ratios to probability risk ratios. And that's important, because that's what people talk about when they say, well, your risk of cancer is such a percent. They're talking about probability-based risk ratios. They're related. And for technical reasons, I have to use odds ratios. But they tell you the same thing, but they're on different scales. If I tell you that the risk of winning the Powerball, or the probability of winning the Powerball is 0.0000, some very small number, but the odds of winning the Powerball, right, are 292 million and change to 1. So it tells you the same thing, but the scales are very different. If you really want to get into this deeply, I put this in here for all the nerds among us. I'm not going to talk about it much. This is not as dispositive as the findings that I've presented to you so far and that are found in the paper. This just looks at the one wave, wave 4, and reports the population incidence of each of these disorders under various pregnancy outcomes. But you can take this and you can compare them, and you can come up with actual single-shot risk ratios for this, if you want to. So for instance, if you want to say, well, what's the risk of depression with an abortion? You say, well, here, if she ever had an abortion, so here it's 30.03%. This is usually expressed in terms of 1,000. 300 out of every 1,000 women who have an abortion by age 28 suffer some form of depression. And you can compare that, well, compared to birth, well, it's 267 women, 268 women who ever have birth. So those are the comparison of those two. It's not totally accurate or precise. These are unadjusted for any other facts. And of course, these two categories overlap, right? Some women are in both categories. But it's a way that you can look at this. And if you look at, compare anxiety, you find that, you know what? There's not so much of a difficulty on these measures with abortion. The unwanted child abortions, here, 282 out of 1,000 suffer depression. With unwanted childbirth, 296 out of 1,000. So the claim that women suffer more risk of depression following an unwanted childbirth rather than unwanted abortion, there's some evidence for that, you see. But if you add all these together, as I do here, you find that the risks are clearly distinguishable for that. So you can play with that and come up with some other stuff. I don't want to go into it and take too much time here to do that. The main finding from both of these studies that I want to point out is that with every instance of abortion, the risk ratio is more than 1. There is increased risk of mental health distress with any kind of abortion, ever. But with any kind of birth, all of the risk ratios are less than 1. Now think about that. What benefits women emotionally is not aborting their unborn children, but bringing them to birth. Different circumstances can alter that a little bit. But overall, motherhood moderates mental disorders. Abortion aggravates them. So that means that a large part of the harm of abortion is something that we can never measure directly on any survey. It's the opportunity cost of not having that child. Women can say, oh, I'm happy to have my abortion. It's so great. But that woman cannot know what her life would have been like had she given birth to that child. Her life might have been greater. She might have been much happier in that. So I'm going to skip over this. So the main point I want to make here, the first falsehood is that it ignores wanted pregnancy abortions. But the second falsehood of these statements is so blatant that we don't even pay attention to it. And that is, what's the benefit of abortion? You see, we've done 40 years or more of studies on abortion, and some studies, like mine, find significant long-term mental distress, and some studies with smaller samples or shorter terms find less distress. And so we're arguing about how much distress there is for women after abortion. But do you know what's amazing? You know how many studies have found a statistically significant benefit, either emotionally or in any other way, for women following abortion? The answer is 0. there is not a single study that has reported a measurable benefit for women following abortion over the long term. Think about that. It's amazing. I've read most of these studies. I haven't found it yet. I'm waiting for someone to come up and say, well, you missed this one, this show. Then, I can say, well, we have one. But so far, there's none. Now, think about these statements from our medical elites. Let's just revisit them, right? The APA said the relative risk of mental health problems is no greater. The AMRC says it's the same whether they have abortion or giving birth. They are conceding something. It's very subtle. But they're conceding that it's not better with abortion. There's no benefit for women from having an abortion. And that's crucially important because the premise of abortion in the United States and in all industrial Western civil countries is that abortion is therapeutic. It brings a mental health benefit for women to have an abortion. That's the justification. And I want to know, where's the benefit? If we're reasonable people and we're doing evidence-based medicine, where is the benefit of this medical procedure? If you want to call abortion health care, okay, it's a remarkably ineffective form of health care. Having an abortion doesn't improve a woman's physical health, doesn't improve her social circumstances, employment prospects, relationship stability, family income, general life chances. It doesn't do any of that. Some studies find a very temporary boost, like completing your advanced degree or having a higher income, but by 5 to 7 years, the women who chose to give birth rather than have an abortion have caught up, and after that, they surpass the women who have an abortion. It doesn't bring them long-term benefits. It doesn't confer any benefit. Infertility, fecundity, parenting outcomes, happiness in marriage, family life, I could go on and on. There's no benefit to having an abortion. We shouldn't have to defend how much distress there is. The other side should have to defend where's the benefit. It's not there. So if we're doing rational social policy, if we're making medical decisions, I don't know of any therapeutic procedure where you say, well, there's no benefit, but it doesn't do too much harm, so we should go ahead and do it. In every rational discussion I know, that procedure should be discontinued. So thank you very much for your attention today. Now, I want to leave time for Q&A. If you want to read these studies, they're all available online. If you want to send me an email, I can return to you a copy of this presentation. You can click on the links and read them. I do want to acknowledge and thank the Ruth Institute for generously funding this research. And I want to thank this convention, Bringing America Back to Life, for organizing this wonderful convention I've enjoyed here this weekend and continue to enjoy today. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Stay right there. Oh, good stuff, good stuff. All right, a couple of easy ones, I think, short answers, because I think, it says, these studies are all on women. Any studies on men that are involved in abortion?
That's a great question. There are just a couple studies on men that are involved in abortion, and they're of men who are in distress because their partner had an abortion and they either didn't know it or they weren't consulted or they had no agency or power in that abortion. And they are disturbed about that. They're trying to move toward men having more say in whether or not there's an abortion. Other than that, I'm not familiar with studies on men. Now, I will say that the AdHealth data I used asked the exact same questions of men. So that we got a fertility history for men, for their partners, right? Did you want to have a child when she got pregnant and all? And I've looked at that, and I have to tell you that the forms of distress are very different. I don't know quite what to make of the data on men, but there's a golden opportunity. If someone is interested in this kind of research, we do have data and measures on men that have never been looked up. The National Survey of Family Growth for the last 3 cycles has interviewed a comparison sample of men along with women about their fertility history, and no one's ever looked at that data.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So what is the next step? Now that we got all this incredible information, how do we use it? Any suggestions on? You just did
Right.
all this stuff. We have so many different fields
Right.
represented now. What can they do with all this?
Well, I'm not sure that I can answer that question. I'm a researcher and I do a lot of the research. One of the reasons I love to come to a conference like this is because there are people out there who are activists and say, wow, that's an important thing to know. We can do this with that. That's not so much my gift. I really don't know. Honestly, I seek to find the truth about these things. The Catholic faith teaches us scientists that we want to seek the truth, whatever it is. And I tell people who fund this research, they say, well, it's great, you're finding all these trouble for women following abortion. I say, well, if I find benefits for women following abortion, I'm going to report that too, because that's the truth. I want people to know that. And, well, I'm not sure I want that. Well, okay, then go fund somebody else, not me. So I think that it's important for us to look at these things and to find them out. And I'm glad that I'm stimulating those kind of questions. I hope you can educate me. We just talked about the data on men. We have another wave of the ad health coming out, and we can look at lots of other things. I want to look at family formation, and I want to look at some of these other questions that have come out. And so I want to just feed this information into all of you great folk who are in the legislative and trying to change the culture and all of those things. So thank you for the question. I'm sorry I can't answer it.
Yeah, the next one I get fairly often as a pastor, and you're involved with ministry, is why are people in the ministry so quiet about pro-life issues, whether it's in the pulpit or in voting?
Right.
So how do we answer for them?
Well, I can't answer for them. I don't know. Many Catholic priests and even Catholic bishops, as you know, are reticent to talk about abortion. I think part of the reason is that they're afraid. They're afraid they're going to lose money or they're going to lose prestige in certain circles. I have to say that as time has gone by, I see that lessening. I see our religion. As Catholics, I see our leaders taking more of an open stance. You think 20 years ago, the pro-life arm of the Bishops' Conference was not nearly as active as it is today in pushing back and in promoting legislation and speaking out against the restrictions on abortion and other areas of human sexuality and fertility. So we're moving in that direction. Pope Francis is very outspoken on these issues, even though he's, celebrated in ways by liberal elites. He is not shy to talk about abortion. He compared an abortion to a contract murder. He talks about how, he minces no words in talking about that or other issues, homosexual marriages and so on. So I encourage that. And I share the concern that's behind this question, that we should try to get our leaders to stand up and be counted and to talk out more.
Excellent. Yeah, I know even in our Protestant world, I think many pastors are just struggling for survival, just trying to help grow. They're overwhelmed, they're overworked, they're not trained, and many are just ignorant of these kinds of things. Unaware as I speak, and I try to get pastors to pray together. When I share that stat of 1 in 3, 1 in 4 women under 40 have had an abortion in your church.
Right.
They're stunned. They really have no clue. And then how do we connect them to our local centers and pray for that?
Yeah.
And some of it is fear. If I get political, I may lose people, I may do stuff. But a lot of it is it's just not even on the radar. And, and that's sad.
Well, it's fear of man. One of the characteristics psychologically of many men who go into the ministry is that they want people to like them. If you're religious and you obey the rules when you're a kid, they say, wow, what a great kid. And they feed on that. And so as an adult, they don't want to do anything where the parishioners are going to say, oh, I don't want to hear that. I don't like that. So
it's true in comedy too.
Yeah.
I want you to like me.
Yeah. So
this one's a little different, broad-based, but why do you believe, or what do you believe is the motivation behind those who defend abortions?
I don't want to guess at somebody's motivations.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. What I want to do is to ascribe the finest and the best motivations to those with whom I disagree. I believe that's our call as charity, in charity, as Christians. Jesus told us to love our enemies. In fact, if you're Catholic, it was in today's morning prayer. It was the tag verse for morning prayer. Love your enemies. Bless those who persecute you. And the reason he told us that is because that's the only way that we can change our enemies, is to call them to greater love, to exemplify that for them. We will overcome them if we love them. If we denounce them and we hate them and we dismiss them, then we're treating them just like they treat us. And we're just going to deepen the divide between us.
And maybe a good summary question here. We had depression, we had anxiety, we had different things. If we added the word regret, what percentage of women who had abortions regret their decision?
Probably. I mean, inferring from the distress that I have, it would be a large number. And of course, there are different levels of regret, right? So we may not be, deep, soul-shaking regret, but it might be saying, I wish I hadn't done that. And my life would have been different. I don't know how many women, coming toward the end of their life, I was going to say on their deathbed, but coming toward the end of their life, say, wow, I wish I had had more abortions. I don't think that's true. I don't know of any woman who gets pregnant in order to have an abortion, right? So when we talk about celebrating it, that's crazy. That's a crazy talk. So regret is much more reasonable, I think, a response to that.
Yeah, I don't have the documentation, but I recently read Randy Alcorn's Why Pro-Life.
Yeah.
Great book, and I believe it's on page 13 on the right side, 3 lines down. It says that 10 years after the fact, 94% of all women who had an abortion wish they never did.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know the documentation of that, but that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And as a pastor who's done a fair amount of counseling, I've seen the same thing of no one's coming thrilled that they've done that. I've had a few people argue with me on airplanes and such that it's the best thing I ever did at that point as a young, because now they're in school or they're pursuing a career.
Right.
But I haven't seen it long term.
Right. 10 years more down the road, not so much.
So great questions. Again, he'll be at the Ruth Institute table, some more information for you. Mike, could you please bring my announcement? Oh, do we have more? Because we still have a few minutes.
Sure.
A few questions just came in and I left my sheet down there. I do that a lot. Oh, yes, your email address. Folks would like to know your email address. How do they follow up on this? Is that available?
They took it off the screen.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It's on the screen on my presentation. Could you put that back up? They're not there. Okay. Well, if you could see the screen like I'm looking at it right now, it's my last name, Sullins.
There you go.
At cua.edu, right? Or it could be PSULLINS at ruthinstitute.org. And if you stop by the Ruth Institute table, you can get that address and other contact information in order to get this presentation or any other information about this topic.
Great. We still have 3 minutes, so we'll do one more. And this one, I got to adjust the reading and see if I can get the writing. Were there enough recorded incidents of multiple abortions and its numbers to derive summary statistics based on the number of abortions?
I did that. I report that out in the first study, the 2016 study, and I looked at the increase in risk for each abortion, up to 4 abortions, and the risk increase linearly up through the 4th abortion. Now, there aren't that many women who have more than 4 abortions. There are a few. The largest number on this data set was 17 abortions, but very, very few women had more than 4. So if you're interested in that, you could look at that first study, and in the table toward the end, it's the last table in the study, I report various alternative scenarios. That's a great question, because what it indicates, of course, is that it's not just the first time having an abortion, but each additional abortion, you have additional risk for that. I don't think that the distress from an abortion is related to the clinical experience so much. but it's related to what I argue in these papers is the life event of having an abortion. It changes the trajectory of a woman's life, her relationships, her availability to men, her ability to get married and form a family and to do other things that lead to stability. And the substance abuse, it opens that woman up to a higher rate or history, looking back, of all kinds of substance abuse, right? To engage in those kind of risky behaviors, to validate the kind of risky behavior of having an undesired pregnancy. And so those are the harms that come from abortion, but most particularly the cost of the lost child that she did not have, because children are a benefit. And so I'm not sure why I said that, but anyway, that's what it is. Yeah.
Okay, well, we do need to wrap up. Thank you.
you.
Put your hands together, if you would,
Thank you.
for our special guest, Paul Sullins.